in order to make it coherent. We are 282 former career employees who proudly served our country at the Department of Justice. From prosecutors, special agents, intelligence analysts, to immigration judges, grant managers, civil rights attorneys, and more, we all carried out our duties faithfully, regardless of who occupied the White House, until we no longer could. Each of us left the department either voluntarily or involuntarily because of actions taken by this administration. Our fidelity to the Constitution and our dedication to our country did not end when our jobs did. Now that we've left the department, we believe it is our duty to sound the alarm about this administration's degradation of the Departments of Justice vital work and its assault on the public servants who do it. It is incumbent on all of us to fight for the Justice Department before it's too late. Just as I've come to the floor to ring the alarm bells about authoritarian control taking over America, here are these employees from the Department of Justice in this letter are saying they are ringing the alarm bells before it's too late. Let's find out what they have to say. The next paragraph goes, Department of Justice's mission, DOJ's mission, is to, quote, to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. It's failing on all three fronts. The Justice Department cannot uphold the rule of law when it carries out the President's retribution campaign and protects his allies, violates court orders, evades due process requirements, directs attorneys to violate their ethical responsibilities, and fire its employees without notice or cause in violation of civil service laws. It also cannot keep our country safe when it ousts FBI employees, prosecutors, national security experts, and ATF officials, shelters offices that prevent community violence, shutters offices that prevent community violence, and dismantles drug trafficking operations, purges the attorneys who enforce laws to protect the environment, and shifts highly trained special agents away from counterintelligence and counterterrorism. Oh, I see, thank you for the note, I see that my colleague from New Jersey is on the floor, and I would welcome a question if he has one.
I appreciate it, and appreciate my colleague pausing for a question. And I just want to first say, as I present my question to him, how grateful I am for his stamina and for his strength, but more even importantly for his insightful truths that he has been telling now for well over 14 hours. And in many ways, we see a tradition in this body of being a deliberative body, but it seems now more and more that deliberation is giving way to what the founders never imagined, which is simply conceding to anything that the President of the United States wants. We were born to check and balance the presidency. We are the Article I branch of government. And as my colleague here rings the alarm bell, it is clear to me that the alarm bell he's ringing is not a partisan alarm bell. It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. It's about asserting the Article I branch of the Constitution's strength, its its purpose, its constitutional intent. And that is to provide oversight. That is to provide advice and consent. That is to provide the check and balance that we need. And for hours now, what I have been seeing is my colleague, Jeff Merkley, has time and time again been laying plain facts that would not play no matter what party a person is from. A president who is encroaching again and again and again on the constitutional prerogatives of the Article I branch of government. And the result of this is that people are hurting. And I really want to get my colleagues' response to this. The fact is, right now, you have a president not going through Congress, not working with Congress, but undermining congressional intent by gutting and cutting programs, gutting and cutting agencies, gutting and cutting bipartisan approved resources for our states in ways that threaten and undermine the well-being of Americans. We see him approving a tariff policy, not one that has gone through this body. In fact, I would say not one that people in this body would even agree on, that is hurting American farmers, that is driving them to their knees. They want trade, not aid. And as a result of that tariff policy, it's not only hurting the bedrock people who put food on the table for Americans and people throughout this world, but it's hurting consumers by driving up grocery prices. What my colleague continues to point out is how these violations of our constitutional norms and traditions, the insult and injury done to our Constitution, has a real-life impact on the lives of Americans, making us poorer, making us sicker in our lack of access to health care. That we are seeing a time now that if we do not ring the alarm bells, more and more Americans will be hurt by a president who is acting more like an authoritarian leader than a democratically elected executive in the Article II branch. And this is not a left or right moment. It is a right or wrong moment. This is a moral moment in America. And I love what Martin Luther King said. He said, the problem today is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so this is a time that my colleague, through doing this extraordinary step here for more than 14 hours, all through the night, standing up and saying, look, democracy has never been a spectator sport. If you love this country, if you love in a deep devotion the ideals of patriotism more than a party, now is the time for all good people to stand up and call it out. And so I want to know from my colleague, this, with the urgency that we have in this moment, with Americans seeing their energy costs go up, with Americans seeing their grocery costs going up, with Americans now seeing the reality of their health care costs going up thousands and thousands of dollars, with marginalized people, with folks who are struggling to provide for their children, for children with disabilities struggling to get the resources they need, with parents not knowing how they're going to meet the rent and pay for medical expenses, how they're going to be able to pay for the basic needs of their families. This is a time that if you believe in the cherished principles of our nation, from patriotism, devotion to our national ideals, if you believe in the ideals of our nation, love thy neighbor, if you believe that we are one nation under God, this must be the time where more people stand up and speak out, because the only thing necessary for the triumph of tyranny is for a free people to remain silent. And so I ask my colleague right now, because there are people saying, what does it matter that a senator is standing up? I ask my colleague right now to maybe say directly to the American people why you are taking this courageous stand tonight, what you hope they will take away, because it's not about you or me, it's not about the 100 people here. We have seen this president back down before when the American people, in a chorus of conviction, stand up and say, no, no more. As Frederick Douglass says, the limits of tyranny are prescribed by the people who face the oppression. I ask my colleague, what is the message that you are trying to send with this courageous stand, with this incredible endurance, with this strong speech you are giving today?
To my colleague from New Jersey, the message, most important, is that the tyranny has already arrived. It is not down the street. It is not around the corner. It will not be encountered on the path tomorrow. It is here at this very moment. And that tyranny comes in two forms, so important to our country. The first is the attack on freedom. Freedom is secured by due process. So when an authoritarian president runs over due process, he threatens freedom for all of us. When an authoritarian president says, I will dictate through research grant control what universities teach, he's stealing the academic freedom of our independent universities and really gutting the vision that people go to universities to explore ideas and to learn, not to receive propaganda written by a government. If you want that version of the world, that's not freedom. That's found in tyrannical governments. That's found in China, not here at our universities in the United States of America. When he proceeds to say we are going to control law firms by suing them and taking away their security clearances and extorting them to put $1 billion of free law into causes the president wants, that is a form of tyranny against the free enterprise of law firms to have the clients they want and serve the people they want. I read an article sometime in the middle of the night that was about the profound impact on nonprofits that are out of favor with the president, and therefore they're not getting the legal help that they had in the past, and how that affects their largely impoverished clients. So there's damage that ripples through the universe from these attacks on freedom. And now is the moment where we have seen the fundamental separation of powers disappear. No, I thought of these robust branches of government, the executive, the Congress, the judiciary, each valiantly defending their role in order to preserve the checks and balances of this beautiful document we call our We the People Constitution. But what happens if the Congress is controlled by a party that says, our goal is to do what the president tells us? Suddenly that check and balance, the president, is gone. What if the court, the Supreme Court, says we want to, regardless of what's written in the Constitution, hand more power to the president? And they say, you know what, we'll make the president above the law, which they did in a law case last year. And suddenly you have the three elements that create tyranny in place of freedom, or authoritarianism in place of a republic. And those are a rubber-stamped Congress, a deferential court, and an aggressive authoritarian personality with a good plan. And he came in with a good plan called Project 2025. And the chief engineer on that Trumpian tyranny train is Russell Vought at OMB. So every essential element of the authoritarian takeover of the United States is here right now. Now, you mentioned a reverberation about how the president's policies are making people sicker and poor. And here is the connection. When you have an authoritarian government, it basically operates to the power of the billionaires. And so we saw it at the inauguration. We saw the billionaires standing behind the president. We saw Elon Musk standing behind the president. We saw Jeff Bezos standing behind the president. We saw Mark Zuckerberg standing behind the president. And when you do that, you're okay pursuing legislation that hurts families while helping billionaires. And that is the theme of what we have seen. Here's a picture of the billionaires lined up behind the president. We call sometimes the bill, his major policy bill, the great or the big ugly betrayal, because he campaigned on helping ordinary people. But then on Inauguration Day, there's no ordinary people behind him. There's no champions for health care, no champions for housing, no champions for education, no champions for good-paying jobs and investment in infrastructure. No, those who have already at the very top of the money pyramid in the United States of America are there. So now you have the main bill, and the main bill, what does it do? Well, it savages health care to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. It savages child nutrition to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. So the authoritarian takeover of our government is also linked to this assault on the families. As you said, groceries are going up. The president's employing tariffs that drive up the cost of groceries. If he was looking to help families, he wouldn't choose to do tariffs that drive up the cost of families. And in fact, the president doesn't even have authority under the law to do tariffs to begin with, which he just took it because that's what authoritarians do until the courts stop him. And the courts, moving slowly, have not acted. And you mentioned health care costs going up. Well, I don't know about what the new costs are in your state of New Jersey. In Oregon, the projection was a 68% increase in costs on the exchange. But nationwide, 114% average, meaning Oregon, well, as much as we're shocked by 68% inflation in health care policies, well, nationally, it's more than doubling. So think of all the people who will be unable to acquire insurance. And that's just a piece of the big, ugly betrayal bill, because then you get into the fact that they gutted Medicaid, the Oregon Health Plan. 70% of the children in rural Oregon are on the Oregon Health Plan. Think of the devastation when 235,000 Oregonians are projected to lose health care. And what happens when they get sick and they don't go to the hospital because they don't have insurance? So then they get sicker, and when they do go to the hospital, it's the emergency room. And maybe the modest health problem has become a major health problem. Maybe the diabetes that easily controlled has become a foot amputation or an eye problem, an eyesight problem. Maybe the cancer has grown or spread around the body. So not only is an illness more expensive to treat, but the odds of recovery of worse, and it's being treated in the most expensive part of a hospital, the emergency room. And then, because there's no insurance to pay for it, the hospital or clinic gets less revenues, and then they have to shut down programs or shut down completely, and then we have less health care for everyone in the community. And then you mentioned utilities, and I was just fielding a question from our colleague from Minnesota, and she said, what about that $8 billion attack on energy projects in blue states? Energy projects that would produce renewable energy that often, at utility scale, is 2 cents per kilowatt hour. My bill in Oregon is fairly cheap compared to the nation. I think it's 12 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour. I'm guessing yours is a lot higher than that. So if that utility can buy energy at 2 cents per kilowatt hour, your bill's going to go down. But I'm pretty sure your bill's going up because of the policies of this administration. So if this administration was worried about families, they wouldn't have passed the big, ugly betrayal that does so much damage to families in order to fund tax breaks for billionaires, wouldn't be using tariffs in this manner, wouldn't be cutting low-cost utility projects that will lower the cost of energy, and thus here we are, 10 months of making Americans sicker and poorer.
And if my colleague would ask the wrong question, because you're making such a great point, and I really hope America hears this, that these policies, these constitutional principles that we're defending here are not just arcane, idealistic things. They have a direct impact on our nation. My colleague is laying it plain. This is what should be animating everybody, is that when you attack the health care of millions of Americans, it doesn't mean you're curing disease and they're not going to have a demand for health care. The demand is still going to be there. And if they're not getting their health care reimbursed, if they're not getting preventative care, if they're not getting regular checkups, they're going to put more demand on our hospitals, which are going to make our hospitals have longer wait times in the emergency rooms, that are going to have our hospitals have less reimbursed care, and our hospitals are going to strain and buckle under that, thus driving up the costs for everyone. You make it plain, and people should hear this. When the president lies to the American people and says he's about all of the above energy costs, he's not. He's about advantaging certain energy over other energy, and it's actually the lower cost energy that he's attacking. Those projects are actually going to lower people's bills. So here he is raising the healthcare costs for everyone, hurting the hospitals that we all rely on, and driving up energy costs for everyone, and giving an advantage to our competitors like the Chinese, who are racing on energy projects in the renewable energy space. But it's even more than that, as my colleague knows. When you have boneheaded attacks on our Constitution, as opposed to going through Congress where there's deliberation and debate, you are actually raising costs in other ways too. As my colleague knows, Americans right now are seeing the investments that we make that return for the taxpayer significant returns in science and research. We are a nation that has exploded industries that the rest of the world is trying to catch up to us. We are the nation that invented so many great things by funding research, basic research and technology. And so attacks on universities, where they are now reporting less postdoc programs, less PhD programs, less research going on in America, you are ceding the pathway to human endeavor. You're closing it off. As my colleague was saying, attacks on universities, making them come and bend a knee, those universities are saying, no, I will not bow to you, you are not my king. And then that king, wannabe king, cuts fundings to our greatest research institutions, not in America, the greatest research institutions on the planet Earth that have spawned new innovations, from quantum computing to fission and fusion, to robotics, to medical sciences. When you cut off the resources to those things, you are starving the goose that has been laying the golden egg for human endeavor, for industries and more. It has a cost when a president goes rogue and does what he wants to do. It has a cost, not just to our liberty, when you make universities, when you make businesses, when you make law firms bow before you or be punished by you. It has a cost to our liberty, but it also has, as you are saying so plainly, what most Americans are saying over and over again, is it has a cost financially to American families who are right now struggling. As you have said time and time again over these last dozen-plus hours, Americans are hurting. Americans are afraid. Americans are worried that they're going to get a diagnosis from a doctor that's going to drive them to bankruptcy. Americans don't know how they can take care of a sick child and pay the rent. And this is directly being attacked by a president who is doing things that are driving up their energy costs, who are driving up their medical costs, who are driving up their grocery costs, and who's failing to make the investments that keep America ahead of the competition we are seeing in places like China. It is boneheaded. It is financially imprudent. It is hurting America as well as our constitutional framework. The genius of our founders in this great experiment that is now 250 years old, that has put us at the top of all of humanity in innovation, in human success, is now being jeopardized after 250 years by a president who is claiming authorities that the Constitution and our framers never intended to rely to be in the executive. And so, God bless America. My colleague from Oregon is giving a master's class today. A master's class now for 14 plus hours, closing in on 15. A master's class in helping people understand not just constitutional principles, but how all of us are invested in this Constitution, how all of us are invested in making sure that nobody steps outside of those constitutional authorities, because when it does, we have seen what has happened. when McCarthyism rose. We have seen what's happened when demagoguery trumps common sense, common cause, common purpose, and a shared devotion to that flag. And so I ask my colleague right now, we haven't even had a year of this president, and we have watched things happen where this body has not even called an oversight hearing, when our very national security was in jeopardy, when you have Americans at the highest level of our Defense Department using a commercial app with reporters on it to release classified information. We didn't hold one oversight hearing. When we took the extrajudicial step to blow up speedboats, there has been no oversight into that claimed attack on people that were allegedly smuggling drugs. We are constantly not doing our job, which is not a partisan one. It is to hold this president in check, that no one operates without accountability and without transparency, because power is corrupting. And when you let someone do what they want to do, when they want to do it, without a check or a balance, it is corrupting. And we know that because we have the most corrupt president, dollar for dollar, of any president we've ever seen, through his crypto schemes, from him exchanging his authorities for compensation that makes him a richer man. Unchecked power leads to corruption. Our founders knew it and designed this system thusly. And so I ask my colleague now, that sense of urgency of a president who has been in office nearly 10 months, if my colleagues in this body do not start standing up and doing their job, holding hearings on his tariff policy, holding hearings on his agricultural policy, holding hearings on his healthcare policies, and I say that generously, because they're not policies, they're not thoughtful, they don't reflect the wisdom on both sides of the aisle. They are hurting people. If we continue to let this president proceed unchecked, if we continue to let him flaunt the rules of our Constitution, if we continue in open eyes to do things like he is doing right now by ripping apart the White House, not going through any of the process whatsoever, that is literally contrary to the laws of what the people's house, not Donald Trump's house, the people's house, if we continue to let him go in this way without checks or balances, I ask my colleague, what are the consequences that you fear might happen in the next 10 months where this president, who wants to be an autocrat, is in the White House?
The consequences of the failure of oversight are enormous. This is not one of the checks and balances people often talk about. They talk about Congress having the responsibility to define which programs will be funded and how much, under what rules they'll operate on, and the president has to execute those programs, therefore a separation of powers. And by holding on to that responsibility, we serve as a check on the effort for an authoritarian to be the force that decides which programs are funded and how much they're funded at and how much rules or what the rules will be they operate under. And we're seeing that transfer of power right now from the Congress to the president, because the president's deeply engaged in essentially the equivalent of a line-item veto by slow-walking funds, by freezing funds, by impounding funds, by slowly getting to the end of the year, and then by filing a rescission request at the end of the year, watching them magically evaporate when the last day of the fiscal year comes, this fancy term called a pocket rescission. Absolutely, all of these are part of a line-item veto strategy, and the president just implementing the programs willy-nilly the way he wants, as opposed to following the instructions from Congress. So in 9 months, we have seen not just an attack on the freedoms, we have seen not just an attack on the cost of living through utilities and through food and through health care going up and up and up, but we have also seen this fundamental collapse of oversight that you've pointed to. If this much damage to the checks and balances can be done from January to October, if this much damage has been done to costs that Americans experience from January to October, if this much damage can be done to American freedoms from January to October, then that next 10 months, that's amplified because the administration's in full gear now. They're not diverting attention trying to get a Secretary of Defense confirmed. They're not diverting attention trying to get the head of the FBI confirmed. No, they're in full gear now with this set of instructions that flow from this plan, Project 2025, developed by our current director of OMB, Russell Vought. And he is one capable individual who has a belief in the supreme primacy of the executive branch, calls it a unitary executive, and that the president should make the decisions about what's funded and how it's funded. The president should make the decisions about the rules for those programs. And that means the collective knowledge of these 100 senators, bringing their diverse life experience, their diverse education, their diverse knowledge of different parts of the country. All of that diverse experience is tossed out. That diverse experience from our 400-plus members of the House of Representatives is tossed out because, no, it's the president and his team saying these programs, at this amount of money under these rules, that is what the authoritarian rule is. And one way we can exercise a check on it is through oversight, is by holding those hearings to investigate in public and doing it in partnership, full partnership with our Republican colleagues. I mean, that should be a collective goal of us all together who believe in the vision of the Constitution, of this check and balance. And out of that information flows action items. When you oversee and see what's going on, then you get together and say, what's going wrong? Let's fix it. But you can't get to the point of saying, let's fix it, if you've got your eyes covered up, your hands over your ears, your head in the ground, and saying, I don't want to look at the administration. I know a lot of bad shit is going on over there, but man, that's the president of my party, and if I dig into that, he's going to be very upset. And we have seen how he is personally directing criminal investigations about people who have criticized him. There is concern by some of our colleagues, rightly so, that if they be the ones to speak up and say this is wrong, they will be next on the list, the enemies list. And when you think about the fact that on that enemies list is even our own fellow senator, like this is people who he was unhappy with because they said that the 2020 election wasn't stolen. And so now he's going after them. In one case, he lifted the security clearances, not just for the person who spoke up and said the president, Trump, is wrong about the election being stolen, but he took the security clearance from all of his coworkers. So a collective punishment strategy. This idea of weaponizing the Department of Justice, this intimidation of free speech, that really does affect people in this chamber as well as outside this chamber for fear of being targeted. And indeed, one way they can be targeted is through their own folks back home. So when one of our senators said, this big, beautiful bill is a train wreck for health care, and I'm not voting for it, within hours, that colleague had been threatened with a primary and announced, you can't threaten me with the primary because I won't run for election. Everyone else looks at that and goes, that's the power that is being brought to bear to create a failure for there to be oversight, for there be people speaking up, because I know across the aisle as many people care about the vision of our Constitution and our responsibility to sustain that framework for our freedom, for our financial success, far into the future, for the generations to come. I know they care about it, but right now, they're looking, we've got a powerful executive who can bring the world down on me. And I'm hoping somehow we will have a few courageous folks to be at the front of the line and say, I'll take the hit. I'll stand up and say what everyone else is saying privately, that this is outrageous, an outrageous attack on freedom, an outrageous attack on the structure of our Constitution, an outrageous increase in the cost for ordinary families, that the vision of families lose and billionaires win is wrong for the people that I represent in my home state, regardless of it being blue or red, that the idea that health care is being slashed for tax breaks for billionaires is wrong, that nutrition programs are being cut for tax breaks for billionaires is wrong. We need our colleagues to join us in this effort so it is not partisan, it is bipartisan, and we're standing up for the core principles on which our country was founded. I thank so much my colleague from New Jersey. And I see my colleague has arrived from Illinois.
I want to thank, through the chair, I want to thank the senator from Oregon for his leadership in bringing this issue before us. We have something in common. Both of our states are facing militarization from the federal level of government. Nominally in Chicago, the president argues that the city is unsafe. I watched this last Saturday as 100,000 people gathered for the No Kings rally and parade, a peaceful, nonviolent gathering of Americans expressing their constitutional feelings and right to express themselves in this republic. I know that you're facing the same threat in the state of Oregon, and recent court decisions seem to suggest that there's more time in the courtroom ahead. I would just say to the senator from Oregon, thank you for leading this conversation. There are so many aspects of this presidency that you could address, and I'd like you to address, if you will, this militarization issue. We have carefully crafted in our existing laws prohibition against the use of military force for law enforcement. It makes sense on its face because these men and women, as good as they are in National Guard units around our country, are not trained primarily in law enforcement. Theirs is a much different type of training. And secondly, to overcome state and local sources of law enforcement is a major constitutional step. And yet this president has initiated it in my state of Illinois, in your state of Oregon, and in the state of California. Would you address this aspect of your comments this morning?
My colleague from Illinois, I so appreciate the question. And certainly you feel it very personally when the target of the president's militarization or the sending of the military into our states is your own state. And you see it with very clear eyes because you go and visit and witnessed and you understand what's going on. And I know in my state, I went down and I saw these 3 women protesting outside of the ICE building. I think they had a sign, I think it had a flower on it. And since that time, what has developed are a demonstration of joy and whimsy. Joy and whimsy. And what I mean by that is I mean the protesters understood that Trump was trying to start a fight and then a riot and then have that riot be a justification for federalizing the National Guard. And so we had many steps in this process. The first is he said, I'm going to federalize the Oregon National Guard, and Oregon Attorney General appealed it, and the district attorney, not the district attorney, the district circuit judge, district judge, proceeded to say, wow, the administration's description of what's going on is untethered to the facts. This is not a rebellion. There is not an invasion, so no, you can't federalize. That's a test in the law. And a very similar decision, I think, was reached by a district judge in Illinois. And then it went to the circuit court. And the circuit court in Illinois, my understanding, is they backed up the district judge and said, yep, no rebellion, no invasion, you can't federalize. Well, in Oregon, the administration took another tack. They said, well, okay, we can't federalize the Oregon troops, but we will send in troops from Texas, or National Guard troops from Texas and California that have already been federalized. And the district judge in Oregon said, no, I'm sorry. Once federalized, it's not like you can just travel through the countryside doing whatever the hell you want. You have to have a rebellion or you have to have an invasion, and you have neither. So no, you can't come. But here is what really worries me about this. When you have an authoritarian president, they have a playbook. And that playbook was carefully crafted for this president under Project 2025. It involves so many pieces of stealing the power purse from Congress, overriding due process, attacking the power of universities and law firms, attacking the ability of free press, including lawsuits against the Wall Street Journal and pressure created against our networks on what information they can air. And an additional part of this playbook is to be able to use the military to suppress domestic dissent. And to create the path for that, you want court decisions that say it's okay, and you want the military to get accustomed to being deployed, so when you tell them to go and suppress domestic dissent, they'll do it. And so here we have the fact that the president was stopped, but there is now 2 more steps coming that I'm really worried about. One is that in California, the Ninth Circuit, a 3-panel set of judges said, you know, one of them said the district judge was just right. There is no rebellion, there is no invasion. But the other 2 said, well, you know what? Even though the district judge used the definition of rebellion that was considered at the time, basically that there has to be a sizable group that is well organized, that is weaponized, seeking to overturn the government. And we think maybe you should apply a looser definition of rebellion. And then instead of looking at the facts on the ground at the time that the president wanted to federalize the troops, look back a few months when there were a few more arrests, and maybe that's a justification to say there's something like rebellion. But most importantly, you should give high deference to the president. And this what terrifies me, because I'm afraid that the Supreme Court may issue a decision even soon on a shadow docket on the Seventh Circuit decision, and they'll say, yeah, it's a rebellion if the president says so. And that is insane. That opens the door to using the military anywhere the president wants, anytime, against our citizens, violating the fears of our founders who didn't want a standing army to begin with because they felt that it threatened freedom, because they knew executives, chief executives, are tempted to use standing armies against their own people. That's what kings do, and that's what authoritarians do. So they were terrified of having those standing armies. And then we had the whole concept developed after the military was used in Reconstruction, that that's enough. Military needs to defend the nation, not be used. So we have the Posse Comitatus Law, and the Posse Comitatus Law says you can't use the military for domestic action, but there's an exception to it, the Insurgency Act, or Insurgency Act. And who knows what's going to happen with the interpretation of that act. So I really appreciate your bill that says the military cannot be used for law enforcement, because right now the courts could give the green light to the president to use troops and federalized National Guard in exactly that fashion. And we need to close that avenue down and do it fast, because we got an authoritarian president bent on being able to use military against the people of the United States.
If the senator from Oregon would yield for another question, you recall, as I do, how many times candidate Trump and even President Trump spoke before rallies supporting his cause and railed about the murderers, terrorists, rapists, criminally insane, and sexual predators who were coming across the border and threatening us. And his argument was that it was that fear of criminal activity by them that warranted his federal intervention in many states, including our own. I just wanted to give one example that is timely and tells the story. First, let me say that fewer than 30% of the people who are being detained by ICE, fewer than 30%, have any criminal conviction whatsoever. These people may be here out of status. For example, they came in on a student visa and stayed when they should have left, or came in here in a tourist visa and stayed when they should have left. But to brand these people that are being detained now in the streets of Chicago, for example, as criminals, violent criminals, as the president described them, is totally unfair. I tell the story of a church that I visited just a few days ago in Chicago, Christ Lutheran Church on Wilson Avenue in the Albany Park section, which is a largely Hispanic section of the city of Chicago. The pastor of that church, Tom Terrell, told me that after his service a few days before, it ended at noon, and as his parishioners were leaving to walk home in the neighborhood, as they do every Sunday, ICE arrived in an unmarked truck and stopped this gathering of his parishioners and started questioning them and asking them for identification and papers. This is becoming common in Chicago. When others noticed it, they came to their front porches and out their front doors and started blowing whistles to let people know that ICE was in the neighborhood conducting this. ICE panicked and as a result of it threw down a tear gas canister in front of these people who'd just come out of church and then got in their unmarked vehicle and left. This kind of activity is far beyond protecting us from the most dangerous criminals who might have come across the border in times past. It is an intimidation and an effort to have people so afraid that they will either not participate in the economy, that they will not be going to church, and many of them are afraid to send their kids to school. Where is this leading and why? I'll tell you, I think you share from what you said, the senator from Oregon, my feelings that this is not the end of it. It isn't a temporary thing. It is a long-term commitment by the president to militarize neighborhoods, particularly those in blue states and cities like Chicago. And what is the purpose? Not just to spread fear, but when the election comes, which is another few months away, of course, but when the election comes, to discourage people from voting in those neighborhoods, if not disqualify them. Does that sound like an outlandish idea from a president who refused to accept the fact that he lost an election? It doesn't to me, and it becomes a reality every time I come home. This president argues that there are dangers in the streets of Chicago. 2 weeks ago, the streets were overrun by 53,000 people who didn't live in Chicago. It's called the Chicago Marathon, and they had 53,000 participants and their supporters. A calm, peaceful, quiet, great day in the history of Chicago. And for him to characterize this as a criminal city and one that needs military occupation is totally unfair and doesn't reflect the reality. This last Saturday, as I mentioned, over 100,000 people gathered without violent incident. And a reminder that cities like that are being besmirched by the president are still solid places to live, with their challenges and problems, of course. But beyond that, it certainly doesn't merit the military presence the president is suggesting. So I'd ask the senator from Oregon, do you feel that there is a long-term plan to this militarization by the presidency?
Well, to my colleague from Illinois, the answer is absolutely yes. The president, as you mentioned, campaigned on the argument that there were violent criminals and they were going to be sent home, who were here without documentation. What we have seen is a wholesale attack based on people's accent and the color of their skin. And in fact, if I understood a recent court decision, he was given some permission to continue targeting people because of their skin color or their accent. And the idea that as we go around America, and we're mostly a few generations removed from being immigrants, more recent immigrants are going to have accents, and we have worked towards the vision of being a race-neutral society, that people are now being allowed to be targeted by ICE because of their skin color. It just is, to me, a horrific embedment of discrimination. And I think that the president intends to pursue this aggressively for every moment that he possibly can, as long as he is in office, and beyond, to the degree that he can help drive future administrations. We saw it through his entire first administration. My first real involvement over the immigration began when I read a speech by our then Attorney General, who said, what we're going to do is separate the children from the parents and send the message that you don't want to come to America. And I said to my team, I'm sure I didn't read that correctly. I'm sure I didn't understand that correctly, because no American administration, not a red administration, not a blue administration, would ever deliberately harm children in order to send some political message. And a member of my team said, well, there's one way to find out. You can go down to the border. And I thought, you know, I've got this weekend free. So I went down to the border, and it's how I became the first member of Congress to go into a warehouse at the border and see the children being taken away from their parents. I will never forget this wire cage with about 8 or 9 kids in it, lined up by height because they were about to get a meal and they'd been told to line up by height. And the youngest was just knee-high to a grasshopper, you know, basically tiny little guy, maybe 4 or 5. And I could see these kids looking through the wire screen, trying to see if they could see their aunt or uncle or their father or their mother or their sister in some other cage in this big warehouse. And I walked outside and talked to the press about it and was just stunned. And I think the nation was stunned. And the president formally reversed that policy a bit of time later. But he never reversed the drive to attack people based on their skin color. Who do we see he wants to allow a free pass into the United States? Basically, a wealthy white population from South Africa. And they're some of the most privileged population in the world. But the president says those are the folks. And remember his comments from his first term, where he said he really wanted people from those kind of Scandinavian-style companies. So I do feel that he wants to pursue this aggressively throughout his administration, and we are going to see a lot more terrorized neighborhoods.
I thank the senator from Oregon.
Thank you. I see that my colleague from Washington State is here. Would she consider, I would welcome a question if you have one.
Mr. President, I rise to ask the senator from Oregon a question. I appreciate my Northwest colleague being here to bring attention to these important issues. And so much has transpired in the last few weeks, and so I just appreciate the fact that you are trying to bring part of the awareness. If we made a long list, there'd be many, many things here in this list of authoritarianism that we do not like, and appreciate you bringing specific attention. Although I do find some musings that people find a bicycle protest somewhat threatening, which it's just not you know, we're kind of famous for our bicycle events in Northwest, so don't know why somebody finds that threatening when the authoritarianism is really the threat. So, but I have been so involved with my colleague Senator Grassley in making a really important point, and that is the president is abusing his power on tariffs. When you think about the actions of proposing tariffs, this is exactly why people said we don't want kings to have this authority. Why? Because it's such an important constitutional authority given to Congress. It is not something that we think that the President of the United States should have to usher in economic impact in this dramatic way. And the IEEPA tariffs, the lower courts have already said, yes, we don't think that he has this authority. He's been abusing this authority. Now he's going to try to say there's other emergency powers, and hopefully the courts will continue to do their job. But when I think about all of the things he's done, and lots of them are big issues, to me, this one, to basically wield an economic impact on the cost of affordability for Americans, for housing, for food, for transportation cost, a whole myriad of things, when it's only the authority of Congress to do this. I think of how big this economic stick is that he is wielding. So all we've said here collectively, bipartisan group of senators, is that you should, if you think these things are so great, you should come to the Congress. But the constitutional authority is that only Congress has this authority. So I think it's a very dangerous precedent. I think it, in a global economy with a lot of economic activity to be had, I don't think it's a good idea to have somebody in the office of the presidency acting as if these tariff policies are their domain. And clearly, the cost of this on goods and services, particularly those that are really, really hurting us, like I said, affordable housing and things of that nature, are really the impacts. And I don't know to what degree, sorry to say I didn't stay up with you and watch all night, so I don't know what degree you covered tariffs, but I don't know what you think about this particular point in this debate of yours about the authoritarian power and how much is being abused on tariffs.
I so appreciate the question from my colleague from Washington State, and I'm heartened to hear of your work across the aisle with Senator Grassley to try to address this question of tariffs. The very first bill ever considered by the U.S. Senate was a tariff bill. So you can imagine our 13 colonies, they got their 26 senators, they're gathered in a fairly small space, and they're going, no, I want for a jug of the tariff on a jug of molasses to be this, and on sugar to be that, and so on and so forth. And over the course of 3 weeks, they reached agreement on a couple hundred products, and the one person who kept notes through this whole thing, a daily diary, got frustrated by, now we're going back to the same product we considered 3 days earlier. But in 3 weeks, they considered a whole lot. But the point is, it was Congress that was deciding the tariffs. This was an inherent power to the president. And there is no law that has delegated power to the president to do a tariff. Tariffs are done by law. That means they are a bill that occurs here, and it is a bill that becomes the actual tariff when it's signed by a president. But the president, we've never delegated that power, and I'm not even sure if we tried to, if the court would say you could delegate it, because the court sometimes says you have responsibilities as Congress that you can't delegate. You cannot delegate the design of how much money goes to certain programs and whether or not they can be canceled. You cannot delegate that. And so here we are with this enormously destructive tariff policy. Now, count me in if there is a slight tariff on goods from very low wage, low environmental, low labor standards countries. Count me in to encourage a little more of the factories to be in the U.S. But for people to make investment decisions, put those factories in the U.S., you have to have a stable tariff regime. You can't have the tariffs up one side and down the next. And so no companies are making decisions about building factories right now. They may say, well, for a few months, because there's this big whopping tariff on Vietnam, maybe we should build a factory here, but wait, that tariff may change. And oh, it did change on Vietnam. And think about the chaos that comes in our foreign policy, because here's Vietnam, a country that we are trying to induce to be a significant manufacturing partner with us rather than products coming from China, and to be a force in the region to counterbalance China to somewhat, and we treat them in an arbitrary and capricious way. Well, there goes years and years and years, decades really, of rebuilding a relationship with them. Or Brazil, the president just says, I don't like the fact that their strong-arm former president is being put in prison for trying to overthrow their democracy. I mean, really? Okay, but you're going to put a tariff on them and 50% tariff? Or last week it was going to be 100% tariff on China after China said they were going to control their strategic minerals. It's chaos. And what I heard from small businesses yesterday, they said we've got two problems that are making Main Street into Pain Street. And the first is the tariffs. They are affecting either the inputs for our products or how we sell our products, or just the uncertainty that is causing people to buy less. And all of that's a problem. And they said the second problem is most of us buy our insurance on the exchange, and because of the not so beautiful, what I like to call the big ugly betrayal of a bill, the average cost of that's going to double across America. And this one owner said, I think I understood him to say he had 4 employees and that he'd talked to 3 of them. They had each said, I'm not going to buy insurance. I looked it up on the exchange, the price has doubled or done something like that. I'm not doing it. I'm going to take the risk. And we know where that leads. That leads to people not going to the doctor when they need to go. It leads to small problems being big problems. It begins to big problems being treated in the emergency room, the most expensive place. So I do think the tariffs are absolutely, we need to reclaim that power here in Congress and being rationality and a theory behind it, a theory that will help make America more prosperous, but not this crazy fluctuating up and down that leaves everybody struggling to know what plant should they grow in their field, what product should they produce in their factory, should they produce more, should they warehouse them, or should they shut down? I mean, no one knows.
Mr. President, if I could. The senator from Oregon, if he had time for another question on this point, you know that the Pacific Northwest is a big export economy. We have many ports. People may not know, but we probably export a significant amount of soybeans. And I don't know if the senator is aware that this is a crisis now. These growers, particularly in the Midwest, are on their heels over this. This is having huge